So the three key components to responsible ecotourism would be safety, education, and minimizing the impact on the natural world and wildlife. So if the goal is to go out and experience wildlife, see and view wildlife, of course we're always going to have an impact. But guides should be extremely well educated and sharing that information on how to minimize that impact on the natural world. Because a lot of people just want to say, oh, well, just don't go in the ocean if we're talking about, wildlife encounters in the ocean, or just don't go in the mountains, or don't go in the forest, or just don't go around that species. But the problem with keeping humans separate from the rest of the natural world and other animal species is that you create a bigger disconnect and divide, and that's where people are just in inner cities and they're on their phones and strictly technology. They're unaware of where their food's coming from and what kind of impact it's having on other animals. And then when it comes down to gaining support for policy change to protect wildlife and biodiversity, which is so important for climate change and for humans, a lot of people don't feel that connection, need, desire, essentially connection to actually take action on those points. So I actually think it's terrible to keep humans just to humans and in cities and industrial, and that's terrible for wildlife because ultimately it creates a sort of apathetic environment. So I think it's really important, and there's a bunch of studies about how important and how good it is for your health, mental health, physical health, to get outside and get in nature and enjoy the time in wildlife, which you can do responsibly with minimal impacts and safely if you have that level of education. So that's why those three things are really going to tie in. So I'm going to start out with education because it's really that cornerstone for all the other aspects, because you're going to be educated hopefully about safety and hopefully about natural behavior and the natural environment to have the best experience possible as safely as possible. So these things are really interchanging. There is another component that I want to bring up, though it's not applicable to every area of the world, but also the benefit to the local community. So the benefit to the local community, whether it be the local community of wildlife, if there's a benefit there, because we're talking about impacts, but there could be benefits to the human local community, and also the component that's not just about the natural world, but about traditional customs and sharing that culture, especially in regards to how that relates to protecting marine resources and things like that. So jump into education. So you want to do your research, check out the website, call the operators, email the operators, and after checking out the website, and find out what kind of environmental considerations that they're taking into play, what kind of safety considerations they're taking into play, and how much do they know about the wildlife, said wildlife's behavior, and how are they minimizing the impacts on that? Because again, we're always going to have an impact, even if you go take a walk outside or you go travel to an area and you want to go look for some specific species or something. It's usually best to go with a local guide. You'll usually have a better experience if they're knowledgeable about that behavior, and you'll actually more likely reduce your impact by going with someone that has been there, has done that, is aware of where that species is. And so a lot of people will be like, oh, we'll just, don't have this operation in this area of the world. But the thing is that you can actually help to reduce your impact both on that local community by not disturbing them of humans, and reducing your impact on the local community of wildlife by going with an experienced guide. So I'm all for experienced excursions with responsible operators who teach about behavior and teach about safety and acknowledge how they are trying to reduce their impact on that species and on that environment. Education about the behavior should be things to look out for, things to do and things to not do. And that can be like, don't wear these colors, don't bring this food along with you, don't walk on this path or off this path or in this area. Or I'll just use the example for sharks because I think a lot of people are probably watching this wanting to know specifics on sharks, and I promise I will get into that. But they're gonna say, don't splash on the surface, don't wear bright colors like yum yum yellow and white because sharks have monochromatic vision and those are gonna stand out to them. Be really quiet when you're getting in and out of the water, or if you're not holding on to something, that when you're swimming you're minimizing splashing on the surface. Or if it's on scuba, should you be on the bottom, should be over by the reef, should be over by the sand, should be off in the blue. What's your depth profile? How far should you be from a point of interest? If they're using chum, which may be very, very natural and in line with the way that the community discards their fish scraps, depending on the island nation, etc. I'll get all into that. Check out the link in the video for that video if it's here by the time this is posted. And just getting all of that information prior to going into that environment is really, really important. Otherwise, you hear about stories about people having, you know, peanut butter bars and they go hiking to go see bears, and then the bears smelling the food and they're coming towards them. So lots to get into on that subject, but I'll leave that one for another video. Also, interactions. So interactions where it comes up as a common thing of like, can I touch the shark? I mean, touching the shark, honestly, you're not going to hurt them. They have really thick skin. They can withstand a bite from another shark. They can swim away. They can definitely turn back around on you, snap, bite off an appendage. So that's more of the reason that we're saying don't touch them. Also because chasing after them, grabbing onto them, or chasing after them, let alone touching them, may actually scare or displace them out of the water. And unless that was your intent for a, you know, self-defense type of thing, then generally we're not going to allow people to touch onto them. Now, in safety, you may need to redirect a shark. If you're with an experienced guide, they should be doing that, not you, but they should be instructing you on the worst case scenario, what if kind of thing like that, so you have a takeaway from that program as well. So if you were ever swimming in the ocean and a big shark swam up to you, because you came out on that program and you were educated about the behavior, about safety, that you would know what to do to respond to that. I would expect the same thing of any kind of wildlife excursion where people are going to view bears. If the bear charges you, hopefully you're not going to just shoot it. Hopefully there are other precautions that you could take to maybe redirect or scare or deter the bear away from you. And prior to that moment, hopefully you were instructed on how to minimize attention towards you. So remaining quiet, or maybe it is making noise, what colors to wear, things to avoid, perfumes, scents, smells, foods, other things like that. So we could, I won't go through like every type of wildlife experience out there, but I'm just bringing up a terrestrial example, you know, using bears, and then a marine example using sharks, because that's what I specialize in. So education about safety, about minimizing the impact, and this safety component should also include the use of emergency equipment. The operators should have emergency equipment on board. You can ask them about that prior to booking with them. I think that's a really good question to ask, and I'll try to give you a recap on questions to ask. But do they have an emergency equipment on board? Are the people certified and trained in anything, CPR, first aid? Are they dive masters? Are they instructors? Are they rescue divers? Do they carry professional liability insurance? Are they professionals? Like, are they doing this and working in this field full time? What is their experience level? How many years have they been doing it? What was their training like? Who trained them? Information like that. So the safety should also include, where is the exit? How do you exit? So if you're on scuba, you can't just shoot up to the surface, right? Especially not in a strong current. So what are those hand signals that you want to go over? So that's communication in regards to exiting on a dive, whether it be scuba, snorkeling, or free diving. And what are the signals for during the dive to help with the flow of the interaction? So if we're working in water, we're not going to be emitting noise. We don't want to emit a noise around sharks. They have incredible hearing. So we want to be really quiet. We want to use hand signals. And so what are those hand signals? What do they mean? When would they be appropriate for XYZ? And then what are the behaviors to look out for in regards to safety, so that we know when to back off or when to exit the water? So I'll just give an example. When ocean diving, we briefed that the dive ladder is always in the water and you don't need to ask permission to get out, because there's a rope draped along the side of the boat where people can hold on to that rope so they don't have to worry about the current and splashing to try and keep up with the boat in the current, and that way they can just go from the rope right over to the ladder and take a break at any time. So if their mask is fogging, if their fins feel like they're gonna fall off their feet, they just need a break, they got stung by a jellyfish, something like that, that they know that they can exit the water at any time and deal with those things while on top of the boat, because when they're in the water, they're instructed to keep their eyes in the water so they know if a shark is approaching them. Now, if a shark is approaching them, of course, the safety diver is the first person in the water, last person out. They always try to maintain that position of putting themselves between the nearest or closest approaching shark and a person. So the safety diver is going to be in between or in line with that person. So if they're diving down and you took a string from a shark to the safety diver and you took a string from a shark to a guest, that the string from the shark to the safety diver would theoretically always be a little shorter, or they could swim around and block if a shark suddenly became interested in a person. Let's say that they were escorting on a dive down. Now at One Ocean, we usually will only have 1 to 2 people dive down at a time so that the safety diver can watch them, watch their back. It's usually just 1 person, and that's because of the social hierarchy. And so it's actually vertical in the water column. And so as they dive down, they're dropping their social hierarchy. So you should get a briefing about behaviors, and not just behaviors like threat displays like pectoral fin dropping, arching, gill popping, maybe specific swim patterns that would be likened to territorial displays, or essentially we call it agonistic territorial body language and swim patterns. And this is where you can see an escalation towards physical confrontation if these specific swim patterns like parallel swimming, following, gill popping, ramming, blocking, and things like that continue on, and you see the sharks starting to build towards the surface. Now this is one example in Hawaii, usually with Galapagos sharks, sandbar sharks, and tiger sharks. I won't go through every single one around the world, but just be aware that wherever the poi is, that's a term that I came up with, that's point of interest. Wherever the poi is for the sharks at that time, it's the individuals that are the closest to the poi are generally going to be the more dominant individuals that you always want to track. And then as you get away from that, you'll usually see a couple, betas, other personality types, but you're always going to have that wild card. And that's the other reason to go with an experienced guide, because there's the unforeseen elements. So you can never guarantee that a wildlife encounter is going to be 100% perfectly safe, and no one should guarantee that it's 100% perfectly safe. They may say they have a perfect safety record, like One Ocean Diving does, but they should never say it's 100% safe. I don't think anything is. Certainly not driving down the street while everyone's texting and driving. That is not 100% safe, because it's a wild environment. And with the environment, they should be briefing about environmental conditions that may affect the dive or the interaction with the wildlife, and how you want to minimize your impact on that environment, especially when you're looking at terrestrial and paths and things like that, trampling, flora and fauna. But in the water, to minimize your impact on the wildlife, you need to be really considerate about the environmental conditions. And the environmental conditions as far as how strong the current is and what the visibility is, because visibility can play into not just your ability to see a shark coming or a whale or whatever it is that you're going out to interact with, but it can also affect their ability as well. So you want to optimize for the best conditions possible. And then the sites that they're taking you to, I think this is another important part of responsible ecotourism. A major key component is that they're minimizing their impact by going to essentially the same sites. Because if you think of a bear population, there's all these bears and they're spread across this entire mountain. If they're just going up the same paths and they're kind of seeing just the bears that are in that area, unless that is a specific area that is utilized just for one component of a life stage or cycle, like mating or giving birth or hibernating or whatever it is, then what you're doing is you're isolating your impacts on just a couple individuals in one area. So for the sharks, you got all these sharks spread around the islands. If you're minimizing it to one side of the island on one island, that's going to be better for the sharks because it's not affecting other sharks that are moving into other areas. Now I can't get into specific, I could, but again, long-winded and can't get into all of it. But we could go species by species and talk about how isolating it to one area could actually have an impact on a species or not have an impact on a species if we're talking about highly migratory species, because every species is going to have sort of a different level of migratory pull and seasonal pull, shifts in abundance and things like that. So maybe I'll do a whole separate video kind of on that. What we can see is that if you saw the same exact individual, wildlife, species, animal, day after day after day, then chances are that that activity is having a major impact on changing the animal's natural behavior. If you're not seeing that individual day after day after day after day, it's either that it's not its habitat, it moves around a lot. But I think this is tough because, you know, if you get into birds, they're going to have nests and things like that. And so same reason why you'd want to minimize where you're going, and, you know, maybe going bird watching and stuff, like you're disturbing one nest. And hopefully you're not disturbing it, hopefully you're just viewing it, but ultimately birds probably going to be aware of your presence, especially if you're, you know, shutters making noise and you're trampling the ground and you create smells in the area that displace other animals that may have an impact on them, and during the time frames, all this stuff. So that's what I'm saying. I'm like, it's unrealistic to expect that we're not going to have an impact. We do have an impact on the world every day with all the choices that we make. We just want to try to minimize that impact. So responsible operators should be trying to minimize that impact, and they should be recording, ideally, their observations, not only so that they can learn from it, so that they can look at what we would call more like an environmental assessment. So what long-term patterns are you seeing over time? Are you seeing the same individuals? Are you seeing natural seasonal fluctuations? And ideally you would have a control site. So a control site would be a very similar site, similar in, you know, depth, temperature, location, elevation. I'm trying to do terrestrial and marine again. And that would be a site that's either monitored by cameras or just minimally visited. And then you could do a comparison to see what are the differences that you're seeing from that area. It doesn't mean that you necessarily need to stop the activity, it's just something to consider, I think, as a responsible operator that should be done. Whale watching is a big one, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who have probably made videos about this, all about responsible whale watching. But you could see or imagine whales, they're such acoustic animals and they communicate by emitting noises, and they're listening for other whales who are emitting noises. So you could imagine the noises of boats, how you would want to minimize the viewing of whales and keep it from a distance so that you're not interfering with their communication, and isolate where vessels are going to approach whales to one area. And again, like I mentioned earlier, ideally not an area that is of a significant life stage cycle use. So for sharks, I would say, you know, not going in and viewing them in their pupping grounds where they're really close to shore. I do think that the minimal changes in behavior is an interesting thing, because at least for sharks, people will go out and they'll go fishing, and a lot of fishermen like the same fishing areas, and they'll be successful at catching more fish in these areas, or there'll be a higher abundance of fish in this area. And a lot of times where you have an abundance of fish, you'll have more sharks. And so they'll be chumming the water to try and catch their bait fish or to catch fish, and that will attract sharks. And then as they catch a fish, you'll get depredation. So the shark comes and bites, you know, half their fish off the hook or the whole fish. And so the shark is essentially getting fed there. And then the sharks can pick up on that, and they may become more active in that same place. So either you're diversifying where you're fishing, but there's also situations where there's discarding of fish scraps. So especially in small island nations where they don't really have a lot of land to put the fish scraps in there. And I'm all about putting that carbon back into the ecosystem like a predator would, essentially recycling nutrients. I just think that it should be done further offshore for the safety of sort of nearby, near shore, unaware swimmers, surfers, and divers. So it's not, there's no confusion there. And I know that there's been incidences, people have seen tragic things, unfortunate things, where livestock was dumped near shore in Egypt as part of an annual sort of sacrifice type of thing, and there's unaware tourists that are swimming there around that time of year, and you can see how that is sort of a conflict of sort of territory where the shark's just trying to get at the food, but then you have a splashing, you know, human swimming nearby. So being sensitive to the discarding of animals near shore without clear signage or operators who could enforce that. Ideally it would be done offshore. I don't think there's anything wrong with if you catch fish and you take the part that you need and dump the scraps back into the ocean. I think that's actually great and can essentially fertilize ecosystems, fisheries, coral reefs, seagrass beds, all these are really, really important things, just to discard those fish scraps further away in consideration for sharks who may be patrolling near shore naturally, and then instead of finding that discarded fish scrap, find a surfer, swimmer, or diver prior to finding that discarded animal. So I'll talk more about that at length. Areas where they do discard fish scraps in mass quantities or substantial quantities, whether it be from a fish processing, these can actually be great areas to go diving. You could have an ecotourism around it. Areas where there's consistent fishing, crab fishing, whatever it is, where you just tend to see sharks more often. Those are great areas to go dive around. But since there is fishing activity and the sharks may be actively hunting or searching for food, there should be a lot of safety and emphasis from responsible operators about how to identify the direction of a current, how to stay up current, how to identify certain behaviors that look like searching or competitive behaviors. If the shark is smelling the food and can't get to the food, it may become frustrated or agitated and kind of search towards people or challenge people. If it can't find it, if the fish scraps are usually just getting dumped, usually the sharks don't really care too much about people. They just want to go get those fish scraps, their natural prey item, and then after all that's gone, maybe they'll go by, they'll check out some people, important time to know to redirect. But I think it's actually usually better if the fish is just discarded, dropped, sharks get it, all good, done. The scent and smell is ideally done and not around the divers, so the divers don't smell good to the sharks, because we don't smell good to sharks. They don't. They probably think that we smell like perfume, the way that we would smell perfume, where you smell it and you're like, oh, okay, I smell it, but I don't want to drink a bottle of perfume. So we don't smell like their natural prey items. We don't want to smell like their natural prey items. So ideally, you're not having sort of that scent around you for too long if it's an area where they're discarding fish scraps or chumming. Again, whole separate video on that one, but the safety is a really critical component to that. So being briefed to look around and be aware of your surroundings, especially in relation to any type of predatory wildlife, but just any wildlife in general, because you want to maximize what you're seeing. And there's a lot of other environmental considerations that are probably not the highlight of this experience, but I'll use one for an example, and that would be a jellyfish. And actually, more people die from jellyfish stings. So having an experienced guide that knows how to identify an urokanji or another box jellyfish, one that provides exposure protection to help minimize, the harmful effects of that to people who may be allergic. Having a responsible guide who's going to ask if anyone has any allergies prior to it, so that they know and have a heads up if somebody has an EpiPen, where is the EpiPen, and then they should be trained on how to administer and use that, things like that. So I'll try and recap all of this. I know this has not been a short video, and this is probably going to be multiple modules, and there's a lot more that I want to talk about it, but I want to give you guys some information so that you guys know what to ask, what kind of safety equipment they have, what kind of safety training they have, how do they minimize the impact, how many sites do they go to, what do they know about this specific species, how many years have they been doing this, and those are really important. And is it of benefit to the local community of humans, not just the environment? And the educational components, my last thing, I want to live on this, but it's absolutely not the least important. It's actually, to me, one of the most, is do they support conservation? So by minimizing your impact, ultimately that is in itself trying to help support conservation, but taking action steps and actually empowering people and educating them on how to further help protect this said species, because you may be having an encounter or viewing this one particular individual in this one particular area, but talking about the populations as a whole on a global scale, if it's a species that occurs globally, and what you could do as this participant in this ecotourism experience to actually help out with protecting the species. Because my biggest hope for someone that does work in ecotourism, who has developed, systems and organizations and things around marine conservation specifically and environmental conservation specifically, that has actually resulted in utilizing those participants to help us to fuel policy to get laws changed to actually protect sharks, it's huge, and it can be so impactful in a positive way if the operator chooses to do so. So if you can go with someone that actually supports conservation, that is taking action in the local or global community to actually increase protection for that species, I think that sort of speaks for itself. That means that they really do actually care about the wildlife and they're not just trying to monetize on it. So look at the actions that they're doing. Make sure that they're being safe for your sake, your buddy's sake, and also for the sake of the wildlife and themselves too. So if you get an inkling like they're reckless, they're dangerous, so they just don't care, then choose to go with a different operator, please, for everybody's sake. And I wish you guys amazing wildlife interactions. I hope everyone gets to go out there and enjoy nature. It's good for you. We're going to be a part of this natural world, so you can choose to do it in a responsible and kind and educated way, or you can go out there and trample the path and not know what you're doing and get injured, and we don't want any of that. So I hope you found this helpful, and if you guys have any questions, please leave them below. I'm always trying to look out for more information that you guys want. I feel like I could talk for a million years. Sorry, 26-minute video, and I've got more to make. But information that you guys actually specifically want to know. So thank you so much to anyone who actually watched this entire video, and check out my other ones. Thanks so much. Aloha.